All right, so bell ringer coming up. So describe how the Bay of Pigs was a failure and how this sparked relations between the USSR and the United States. There we go. I'll zoom in a little bit more for you. All right, this failed invasion attempt set up by the CIA was a failure. It was a failure. Didn't work out the way the United States wanted. All right, so what do we got here? Describe how the Bay of Pigs was a failure. What was the Bay of Pigs? What was that? What was it? Someone's got to help me out here. Jakari, what was the Bay of Pigs?
It was a failed invasion attempt of Cuba.
Okay, Cuban exiles, right?
Yeah, Cuban exile.
Okay, good job, good job. So Fidel Castro, to kind of set the stage here, Fidel Castro, he kind of overthrew the current leadership in Cuba at that time, and right around 1958, and he was trying to push out the United States, I guess you'd say, influence in Cuba. And he started nationalizing oil refineries, nationalizing production of sugar and coffee, right? And with that being said, that took a lot of money away from the United States. The U.S. had some sort of economic control, exports, imports, ever since the ending of the Spanish-American War in the late 1800s. So that being said, this was a lot of money on the line here, and Castro comes in and takes it over, and he tries to restrict it as much as possible, and this created a lot of bad tensions between the United States and Cuba. And like I mentioned before yesterday, he even cut the water supply off to Guantanamo Bay. So the United States had to build up a water supply there and try to make sure and provide water to that military base. And this cost millions and millions of dollars to the U.S., eventually billions of dollars. So this was obviously alarming. And rather than trying to build relations with the United States, who did Castro look to for a relationship, for a friendship, for an alliance in a way? Jakari?
Khrushchev.
Yeah, Khrushchev and the Soviet Union. Yeah, good job, good job. So this is what he was doing, right? He was already trying to aid try to form an alliance with the Soviet Union. And that was alarming because Cuba is really close to the United States. It's only 90 miles away. And if that would happen, that would really show the United States in a bad standing, almost like they were weak. Because here we are with trying to contain communism, and it's already in our backyard. Right? It's right there in our backyard. So with that being said, this pushed the United States to try to form an invasion onto the island of Cuba to push out Fidel Castro's leadership and this communist regime, this communist, I guess you'd say, takeover in Cuba. And the CIA and many military strategists tried to train many of these Cuban exiles to invade the island, but it was a failure. Why was it a failure? Why was it a failure? What did JFK not do, which would have helped this invasion out? Cody, go ahead. Yeah, right. We didn't use the Air Force. We didn't use the Navy. And one of the real reasons why we didn't do that is because that would have really took away everything we stood for, right? We want to try to establish democracy all around the world and allow people to choose what type of government they would like. Mostly if it's aligning with democracy, though, with free elections. But if we would just go in guns ablazing, that wouldn't look too good for the rest of the world. And that would be almost like ammunition for the Soviet Union to explain that to all these other countries that were maybe in limbo of whether or not they want democracy or communism. So that wouldn't look too good. So this failed attempt, this overthrow of Fidel Castro, just pushed the USSR and Cuba to really form this hatred against the United States and lead to, which we're going to talk about today, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay, is going to raise tensions even more and really put a stain on the relationship of the U.S. and the Soviet Union. All right, is there any questions on the Bay of Pigs? So again, JFK, really the start of his presidency, and this is happening. So what do you think that many of Americans think about JFK? Although, yeah, the mystique of him, we talked about that. He was a young man in office, something new that the president this lost trust of JFK. He said, you know what? He's inexperienced. He's too young to lead our country in the right direction, especially here during the Cold War. And like I mentioned, under the video mentioned, they said that he wanted to put a man on the moon to try to avert the tension of what happened at the Bay of Pigs. Okay, so things are only just going to get heated up, though, which today's lesson's all about. Cuban Missile Crisis. That's the only vocab term for today. Cuban Missile Crisis. All right, so what do we have for the Cuban Missile Crisis? When did it happen? What was going on here? Haley Klinger, what do you have for the Cuban Missile Crisis? All right, so the tensions were high, right? Early 1960s, and right after the Bay of Pigs, right after the United States and Cuba were having bad relations, the Soviet Union thought this was their best plan to try to level the playing field a little bit, right? Try to put ICBM missiles on Cuba to try to maybe spark a wager, or like I said, make everything a little bit more equal, an equal playing field. Because the United States, where did we have ICBMs at? Where did we have them at? Could we target the Soviet Union with our intercontinental ballistic missiles? Jakarta, yeah. Where did we have them at? Do you remember?
Isn't it Iran?
Turkey.
Turkey.
Yep, Turkey and Italy, parts of Western Europe. Okay, so we already had a gun pointed at the Soviet Union for quite a bit of time, since the mid to late 1950s. And the Soviet Union obviously didn't like that, so they wanted to try to level the playing field. And the way to do that is with this alliance with Cuba. Okay, and like I mentioned, Cuba's communistic now. Oh my gosh, so this looked pretty bad for the United States as we're trying to contain communism in Asia and Europe. And now all of a sudden, it's in our backyard. All right, so today, Cuban Missile Crisis. We're going to talk about this a little bit more in detail. So Khrushchev of the Soviet Union and Fidel Castro, it almost looks like they're best buddies here, doesn't it? Side by side, posing pictures together. And this just really showed the tensions of the Cold War. And at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, it seemed that this was the height of the Cold War. This was where tensions were highest, okay, where they're most intense. Because who knows? Nuclear warfare could happen at the snap of a finger or the push of a button, right? All right, so the Soviet Union, after the Bay of Pigs, they wanted to make sure that the United States could not invade the island, right? They already tried with the Cuban exiles and tried to make it seem that there's an overthrow or rebellion in Cuba, even though we all know that the United States was pushing for this invasion. And it was really the United States behind the scenes, right? Okay. With that being said, Khrushchev and the Soviet Union wanted to try to protect the island, make sure that this communist island could stay secure, right? And they thought, well, if there is communism in the Western Hemisphere, real close to where the United States is, like I mentioned, it's only like 90 miles away, then this would maybe become a domino effect to the rest of the world to see. All these other countries around the world, if communism was in the Western Hemisphere, then this would spread. Like I mentioned, it would be a domino effect. So they wanted to make sure that they could keep communism in the Western Hemisphere. So Khrushchev decided to send nuclear missiles to Cuba to try to protect it and to make sure that they could keep an eye on the United States and keep them at bay. For, like I mentioned, since the 1950s, the United States had these ICBM missiles in Turkey, in Italy, and in Western Europe, pointed at the Soviet Union this whole time. So if the Soviet Union ever acted out, the United States had the upper hand in discussions, right? In conversations. But now all of a sudden, Khrushchev thought this was the best idea to try to eliminate that threat in Western Europe. If they can establish ICBMs in Cuba, real close to where the United States is at, then this will even the playing field. This will put the United States at bay and show that the Soviet Union can target the United States at any moment, at any time. Okay. Although they couldn't really reach New York City, they could reach Washington, D.C. with these ICBMs. They could reach any East Coast city, pretty much like I mentioned, all the way up to Washington, D.C. Although they couldn't reach New York City, Washington, D.C. could be targeted at any moment. What's up?
Could you close one of the two blinds?
Over here? Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you.
Yep. So we found out about this, obviously, because of our spy planes. And we were taking pictures of many of locations, that good? Many of locations on Cuba to see where these missiles were located. And we depicted that, you know what, they do have missiles. And with Fidel Castro at Cuba and his extreme hatred to the United States, one of these missiles could be launched off at any moment, right? At any moment. So this was really, I would say, one of the most intense moments of the Cold War, if not the most intense moments. Yeah, you could say the Korean War, you could say the Vietnam War, but the Cuban Missile Crisis is right up there, especially since this put fear and paranoia all throughout many Americans' lives. Got that, Andrew? Okay, cool. So here's a picture of kind of the reconnaissance of the island, and I'll show you a picture here soon of where these missiles were located all throughout Cuba and what they could maybe target. But MRBM, this is medium range ballistic missiles. Okay, so that's just another another name of ICBMs. And this was a picture of some of the launch sites in Cuba. And it just goes to show that the USSR isn't joking, that they're not kidding, and that playing field, like I mentioned, is now equal. And this really was an arms race. This really was eventually, like we'll talk about, a space race and a competition between the two superpowers. And that really no one has a clear advantage. Okay, no one really has that clear advantage. Both had alliance systems, NATO, Warsaw Pact. Both had, had the highly sophisticated nuclear weapons, the hydrogen bomb. Both of them had the ability to reach space, which at this moment, the Soviet Union was taking the lead. And both now have the ability to target whatever city they would like in each of their countries, mainly the capital. All right. We need to try to prepare for nuclear war. And tomorrow I'll talk about fallout shelters. I'll talk about this fear of bombing in the United States, of how many Americans can prepare for this attack if it may happen. And that's an interesting topic in itself. And there's many cartoons, many descriptions, posters, really detailing how many Americans can protect themselves from nuclear war. And it's kind of, I wouldn't say funny, but duck underneath your desk, kids in school. That'll protect you from a nuclear bomb. Most likely not, right? But we had to do something to try to put things at ease. And like I mentioned, the creation of fallout shelters, which I'll talk more about tomorrow. But like I mentioned, this heightened the opposition, right? This heightened the rivalry between the Soviet Union and the United States, as it seemed that these two powers were neck and neck. So with that being said, the United States had to try to protect themselves and try to maybe stop the trade of the Soviet Union. I won't say trade, but the Soviet Union supplying Cuba with these nuclear weapons. So they're going to try to maybe form a blockade. But can you form a blockade around international waters, in international waters? Can you do that? No, you can't. You can't. And if you try to block off trade with other countries or block off international waters, what's that a sign of? What's that a sign of? Khrushchev says, you know what, if the United States and JFK decide to blockade our ships in international waters, that's a sign of what? Ethan, what do you think? War, right? And at that time, it's going to be nuclear war. So this is war that no one wants to see. And Khrushchev explains to JFK, if you continue to block us off of our trade to our ally now, Cuba, then this is going to lead to nuclear warfare. And this fear, this paranoia spread all throughout the U.S. Like I mentioned, fallout shelters were created, and many Americans tried to prepare for the worst. But here's where these missiles could really reach. Like I mentioned, it'd be pretty close to Washington, D.C. But New York City, it'd be really hard to reach that. Although these intercontinental ballistic missiles were, at the time, the most advanced, it still was hard to reach many of these East Coast cities like Boston, New York City, and even Washington, D.C. would be hard to target. But Florida would get whopping. Georgia, all those states kind of moving up in the southern portion of the U.S., all the way over into Texas, okay, New Orleans. It just seemed that this was, like I said, a huge paranoia, and that the Soviet Union could target any one of these cities no problem, at ease. Okay, there's really no defense against this at that time. How do you stop it from really reaching its destination? Well, there really is none at that moment, at that time. Nowadays, I think we have the ability to defend ourselves from these nuclear missiles, but if there ever was one launched at us, but at that time, there was nothing. There was nothing. Okay, we're going to go through a situation here, I'll pull it up, of what JFK actually does, what his plan is to counteract the Cuban Missile Crisis. But I'll give you a scenario. Let's see what you guys figure out, what you guys would like to do. So let's do that right now. So anyway, here's where the ICBMs are located on Cuba, the Soviet Union in red, obviously, and where these missiles were located, where they're, what they could target. As you can see, the limit of these ICBMs really up the East Coast out into, where Texas is located. And like I said, this was a huge paranoia, huge fear Not only do we have the Red Scare in the U.S., but now a fear of nuclear war. The first time ever, right? Ever since the ending of World War II, we held all the cards, right? We could target the Soviet Union whenever we wanted with nuclear weapons, but now the field is equal. All right, so let's see what you guys would do here. I'll go back to it, don't worry, what JFK did, but let's see what you guys would decide to do if you were JFK and the Soviet Union. So if you want to, you can write this down in your notebook or on a Google form. So what would you have done? So number one, would you airstrike these ICBM locations on Cuba? That seems like a pretty good idea, right? Maybe not, right? Maybe not. If you don't destroy them all, there's a high chance that you would probably get an ICBM launched at one of these major cities in the U.S. Two, do nothing. Just sit back, relax, and maybe this will kind of dissipate. Maybe this will mitigate the situation. I don't know. Maybe not. Three, diplomacy, negotiate. Try to come up with an agreement, right? Have some sort of agreement with the Soviet Union to maybe pull their missiles out of Cuba. But with the tensions the way they were, I don't know if that will work. Four, military blockade. So send your naval vessels, your naval ships, okay, your battleships out to try to block off any missiles coming into Cuba or any other support, okay, weapons and different types of advanced technology the USSR had. Five, invasion. We talked about the Bay of Pigs. It didn't work out. But hey, if the United States steps in and actually forms an invasion, that island will be taken over no problem. But if it doesn't work out, some missiles could be launched at these major cities. Six, nuclear weapons. Let's just nuke the island of Cuba. Let's just destroy it. Right? Okay, I'll give you, 30 seconds. Come up with a decision what maybe you would do. Maybe there's a combination of these numbers you would maybe want to do. That's fine too. So if there's, I don't know, let's say you want to do 4, 3, and 5. I don't know. Or maybe if you just want to nuke them, you can just put a 6 down. So I'll give you, 30 seconds to decide what your decision would be if you were JFK. All right, Andrew, what would you do?
Two, I would do nothing.
You'd do nothing. You'd sit on your hands and say, ooh, well, we're just going to sit this one out. All right, we're going to wait it out, see what happens. Okay. Zerby? 3, diplomacy, negotiate. Okay. All right. Maybe at that time, some negotiations would be helpful. Okay. Cody, what would you do? Nuke them. Holy cow. Okay. So that would definitely take out any of the threat in Cuba. That would definitely make sure that there would be no nuclear weapons at Cuba and no communism there. The whole island would be pretty much destroyed. All right. Jakari, what would you do?
I would probably military blockade so they don't get any more nukes.
Oh, okay, but you could
And
really risk it there. All right.
and then
Okay.
airstrike
Airstrike.
the nukes that are currently there.
All right. So destroy them before they could even get up in the air.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Okay. I like that. All right. Alyssa?
2 or 3, but if it goes on long enough, 6.
Oh, okay. All right. So you're going to sit back, try to negotiate, but if things don't ever come around.
Give up.
Yeah, yeah. If things
Take out
don't,
the competition.
yeah. It's like I gave you a try here. We could have talked it out, but now we're going in guns blazing. Ryder, what would you do?
Probably 3.
Okay, negotiate. All right. Ethan,
Probably 5.
invasion and an airstrike. Okay. All right. I like that. I like that. So you're not nuking them, but you're showing your authority in the Western Hemisphere. No one's going to mess with us here in this part of the world. I respect that. Haley Claire? nuclear weapons then? All right. Okay. I respect that. Angel, what do you do? Do nothing and try to negotiate. Okay, good. All right, so let's see exactly what happens here. All right, so with JFK, he had a big decision to make. A young president, like I mentioned, coming in, really have no experience with diplomacy and talking things out. And this was really a test for him in his early presidency. And many Americans were at fear of what could happen. This is unbelievable. And it just was unfortunate. With the failure of the Bay of Pigs, he had to really make the right decision, or many cities in the U.S. could have been targeted by nuclear war, and nuclear warfare could have happened. And we all know there's no clear winner if that would occur. All right, so JFK decided, well, we're going to blockade. We're going to use a military blockade around the island of Cuba. Even though Khrushchev said, hey, if you continue this blockade, this is a sign of nuclear war. He decided to do it anyhow. It's like, well, we need to try to prevent these nuclear missiles and new advancements in technology from getting to the island of Cuba. If we can prevent this from happening, then obviously this will push for failure of launching these missiles at the United States. And then he decided, well, we're going to try to negotiate with the Soviet Union. All right, if he invaded the island, this would push for nuclear warfare probably. If he tried to invade it, this would be an example to the rest of the world that the United States would use its military to take over whatever they would like for their benefit, right? And that's a sign of imperialism. And the USSR could use this almost as propaganda to explain to the rest of the world that the United States isn't really what it stands for. Okay, where people have the opinion and the idea where they can have free elections or whatever type of government they would like, democracy. Okay. All right, so the invasion probably wouldn't be a good idea. The airstrike probably wouldn't be a good idea. Military blockade, although Khrushchev said nuclear warfare would happen if he did this, JFK went out on a limb and tried it, and it kind of worked. But here's the end of the bargain. So JFK decided to reach out to Khrushchev and try to mitigate the situation by explaining to Khrushchev, we will remove our nuclear missiles out of Turkey, out of Western Europe, these ICBMs, as long as you move your ICBMs out of Cuba. Okay, so that eliminates the risk, right, of nuclear warfare for both sides. And for a short time period, this looked like, you know what, tensions might have been eliminated. Right? Nuclear warfare was kind of pushed to the side and avoided because of JFK and his negotiations, his ability to reach out to an opposition like Khrushchev, like the Soviet Union, and come to an agreement. Although we lose our ICBMs in Western Europe and in Turkey, this was an advantage because, you know what, now these ICBM missiles are out of Cuba. Right? So now the playing field is now equal, and it prevents the idea of nuclear warfare happening. Okay. All right, so is there any questions on the Cuban Missile Crisis? JFK, like I said, avoided this nuclear war by negotiation, by a naval blockade. And it looked like his experience, right, was being boosted up, even at his young age. And many Americans respected that. Avoided this nuclear warfare. And what else? There's only one drawback to this yet. Is Cuba still communist? Yeah, okay. That's unfortunate. It is what it is. But the Cuba would still be communistic at that moment, at that time. And that obviously isn't great for the United States, but it's better than nuclear warfare, right? Oh, yeah, for sure, for sure. And this is going to lead Khrushchev to do something different, to try to have a one-up on the United States. And this is where the creation of the Berlin Wall occurs. Okay, so tomorrow we're going to talk about the Berlin Wall and a little bit about fallout shelters because we just talked about the Cuban Missile Crisis today. All right, is there any questions on that, guys? We all good? So again, this is happening right around 1960, 1961, the start of his presidency, moving into 1962. So this was, tensions were high. Tensions were high. What's up?
How you doing, guys? Just ignore me moving around. If you would, though, while I'm here, take your mask off and just tuck it under your chair. Everybody social distance. We're good. I'm allowed to record you that way. You too, Mr. Bowman.
All right, sounds good.